Hi, everybody. Welcome to the December call for Wharton Alumni for Boards. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really happy today. These are some of the funnest calls we have because we are more connected to Wharton when professors come join us and are willing to answer questions and talk to us about the work that Wharton may be doing in regarding corporate governance. Just a little bit of information. Once again, I think I mentioned this before, but we're really happy we're still celebrating that we just got official word that we are an official club through Wharton Alumni for Boards. William, a partner in crime, is one of our board members, William Velez, who's waving. And one of the things that I wanted to let you know is that we are working very hard on content for next year. So you will receive a 2-minute question form to tell us a little bit about what you would like to hear about. Working hard for you guys and also to advance corporate governance. So we're excited. Don't want to take up more time. I'm going to spotlight our guests, and we're going to have a fireside chat for 20 minutes. And what we'll do is open up for questions at the end, like we always do. And I'm just reminding everybody to please introduce yourself, tell us your name, your Wharton affiliation, your class, where you're calling from, as an intro to the question. Vit, thank you so much for coming and joining us today. We did share your bio with the group, but I always find it very interesting when our guests tell us a little bit about themselves. So just as a headline, I want everybody to know that Vit is a very busy person, but he's a Wharton professor who's leading the ESG initiative at Wharton, and we will talk a little bit more about that. But with just that background, Vit, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Marianne. Thanks to all of you for joining and for your interest in ESG at Wharton and the relevance of ESG for the boards that you're currently on or that you might be on in the future. As Maria said, I'm a faculty member here in the management department. I've been on the faculty 26 years now. And last July, I assumed the leadership as Vice Dean and Faculty Director of the ESG Initiative. Let me tell you a little bit about my personal background, research background, and then talk more specifically about the ESG Initiative to start. And then we can have some just discussion before we open it up for questions. So my background, I studied as a doctoral student looking at how multinational corporations manage stakeholder relationships, particularly in emerging markets. So really political risk management and taking some of the questions around corporate governance and extending it beyond the boundary of the firm to think about government relations, community relations, and the like. My advisor was a Nobel laureate in economics, Oliver Williamson, who had studied these questions in the domestic context, looking at mergers and acquisitions. And I was taking it out into the frontier markets and saying, well, what if you can't internalize? What if you can't just solve the problem by bringing someone inside the firm? What if you have to manage the political relationships? For many years at Wharton, I studied how corporations either assess or mitigate political risk in emerging markets, build stakeholder relations, and tried to argue that that was value enhancing. That it would contribute to projects being on time and on budget. And in recent years, as the ESG conversation has taken off, those two journeys or those two kind of sets of questions really overlapped. What environmental, social, and governance factors are material to the enterprise? And how do stakeholder relations affect profitability, affect timeliness, affect financial and operational performance? In both cases, there's a real paucity of good data. We're struggling to learn what firms are doing, what sort of relationships firms have, what sort of conflicts are spilling over into the bottom line. And so we use a lot of non-traditional data using media content analysis, government regulatory reporting, scraping the web, scraping social media, and trying to see how people think about the firm on an issue in a place and how it relates to firm financial or operational performance. Again, as that topic grew in recent years, there was a decision by Dean James to elevate ESG into one of the top 2 strategic priorities for the school. We weren't starting from scratch. There was a lot of work going on at Wharton. I'd been here for 26 years working on these topics. We had a center for the Zicklin Center for Governance and Business Ethics, which had actually been here many decades longer than I had. It was run out of the Legal Studies Department by Bill Laufer. There was also over a decade-long initiative on impact investing, and then another 30 plus or 25 or 30-year plus initiative focusing on tail risks run out of the insurance and operations area. All of those different units were brought together under the umbrella of the ESG initiative. But it wasn't just repackaging or rebranding existing initiatives. There was a real increase in the resources available, a real emphasis in fundraising on additional resources. More faculty are doing research in these areas than ever before. We're funding research across 7 departments of the school. More students are interested in these topics. One of the first things we did was launch the ESG major, which is now the 4th largest major this year in the school, and the first year that MBA students can take the major, and the first year that undergraduates can concentrate in it. We have over 30 electives that students can take to fulfill the major. And we also have a flagship executive education program, including a certificate for senior leaders, board members and C-suite executives covering ESG, but also certificates for financial service professionals and then strategists and consultants. And those programs are run in our new Wave classroom, which goes well beyond Zoom, allows me to stand up and see 90 different faces on 90 different monitors with 20 different microphones, really giving you the sense that you're in a room with us, even though you're remote. And that program's run successfully twice already, and we'll be running it again this spring. I guess broadly what we're trying to do with the ESG initiative, and I think this is just an important caveat before we get the conversation going, is ESG is about assessing where, when, and how environmental, social, and governance factors are material. The traditional methods, the traditional data aren't really fit for purpose to answer that question, and we can talk more about why. But we're coming at this with the same kind of approach that I took to political risk, saying that we need better data, better analysis to answer that question. And in some cases, the answer is going to be we need to invest more. In some cases, the answer is going to be we need to change the investment. And there might be cases where we're spending too much. I think this is really relevant for boards for a pretty obvious reason that I also had some personal experience with. I was an advisor to Engine Number One, and that was my COVID project. I didn't work with them directly on the ExxonMobil campaign, but in May 2020, they successfully unseated 3 members of one of the largest publicly traded companies' boards in the world. And they did it because they made the case that those board members weren't paying attention to ESG risks and they were destroying shareholder value as a result. I think then the morning after that vote, just about every board member of a publicly traded company in the world said, what do I need to know about ESG to make sure this doesn't happen to me? And I think those questions are ongoing, and we don't have easy answers. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is provide the tools, the data, the analysis to highlight what and how you answer that question. It's not just buying a data set. It's not just an ESG strategy. It's something much more holistic, akin to enterprise risk management or akin to good governance broadly. And so we're pushing forward that frontier, and we're excited to do it in a way that's practically relevant, connecting with you today. So
yes,
Maria,
so thank you.
hopefully
So
that's a
thank
good
you.
introduction.
Yes, thank you. And actually, you took my second question, which was about the Wharton, initiative with the ESG program. Glad to hear that, and glad that it's, to hear that it's so popular. So, have you had graduates of that program already, or is it in its infancy?
Well, so like everything, well, I sort of emphasized a lot of this isn't starting from scratch. So in recent years, we've had a major in business and energy, environment, and sustainability, the B's major. And that was a rapidly growing major, and that is now part of the ESG major. So we have had B's majors for several years, but now this year, this May, will be the first time we have ESG majors. Some of them will be B's specialists. So they will specialize in business, energy, and the environment and sustainability. But the ESG major, the first graduates to have that on their diploma, will be this May.
That is quite interesting because, and it relates to your other comment as well. I'm currently sitting on one board that went to the consulting world because we were so worried about addressing this properly that I think we focused the conversation through the audit committee. I sit on the audit committee, so it was the audit committee that brought, one of the major firms that could at least ensure that our risk management system was properly addressing the risk opportunity. I sit on another board that has also worked on a strategy process with a consulting firm. And there, I think the conversation is a bit more robust because we've elevated the conversation to understand what is our strategy, what are the opportunities, not only the, the risk management from audit, but also the opportunities as our business model, our constituents are impacted by, in that case, sustainability processes. So it's really interesting to hear perhaps the research that Wharton may be involved with and the conversations that you're having with private enterprise about this.
Yeah. So, one of the things we're really emphasizing is doing research often in partnership with industry. So we've had a number of leading asset managers, corporates, consultants come to us with these types of questions and saying, can you work with us to come up with an answer? We helped Morgan Stanley improve its municipal finance model. We were working with Brown Advisory to improve their sovereign finance model. And so our research is trying to come up with new ESG data that can be put into a trading strategy for municipal fixed income and sovereign fixed income securities. What you're talking about is a broader perspective around how we govern and how we structure the company to better assess risks and opportunities. I think there are a couple projects that speak most closely to that. One is a longstanding effort we've been doing with EY, with in particular with their geostrategic business group, which was almost spun off into Parthenon, but then not spun off and is now back under EY. And we actually have a book coming out. I got the concluding chapter today for review, and it should be coming out in May. It's called Geostrategy by Design. And it really focuses on how you set up the structure of a company to better assess stakeholder, political, social, ESG risks and opportunities. And talks about some of the trade-offs involved in that, if you take too much of a compliance perspective or an audit perspective, you'll tick the boxes, but yeah, you probably won't focus on the opportunities and focus on the strategic decisions, because audit and compliance are more about making sure you're compliant, not really feeding back into the strategy and the design. If you focus too much on ESG or political specialists, they'll also struggle to see those business upsides and business opportunities because they'll be so focused on the subject matter, they won't be able to connect it to the company itself. So, you'll have great relationships maybe with government agents or with civil society and good communication and good messaging, but you won't have that integration into your strategy. Some people put it into finance, and there you might find some good hedges or some good trading strategies, but again, will it be bolted into strategy? The people who put it into operations, often devolve some of this well down to the ground, where it might be really good on a tactical day-to-day basis, but it's still not up there at the level of corporate strategy and global strategy. And so it's a real struggle to figure out exactly where it should sit. I wouldn't say we take a strong point of view in the work with EY beyond the fact that it should be cross-functional, that it should have board-level oversight and someone who is trusted by the board and by the senior executive team. We've seen it work, most commonly it's the person in charge of enterprise risk management, but it can be the general counsel or it can be someone in strategy. And in companies with a strong brand identity, it might be the chief marketing officer or the chief brand officer. It's someone who's sort of viewed as bringing together operations, finance, government affairs, sustainability, someone who can put that remit under their authority and can speak to the CEO or can speak to the board. And then the challenge is getting the right data to them. If all you're doing is getting some ESG scorecard or looking at, failures, you're not being strategic. You really want to have an in-depth analysis, kind of a visioning exercise of what are some of the key trends? What are 3 or 4 of the ESG trends? What are the risks and opportunities they provide? How well positioned are you? So, you want to be thinking about ESG in the same way maybe you think about AI, or the same way, 5 or 10 years ago, you were thinking about digitalization. You want to get beyond just the numbers and the compliant and the scores, and really start talking about how might the world change because of the climate transition? How might the world change because of growing awareness about human rights or indigenous rights or a living wage, and what might that mean for our organization? Those are the types of tactical strategic decisions. And you see, as soon as you do that, it can't just be one silo or one geography. It has to be more integrated and more high level, and someone who can think about 5 years out or 10 years out, because it probably isn't going to change what you do 6 months from now or 12 months from now as much as 2 or 3 years.
Yes, no, you're right. And I think, at least in my case, when we've engaged more enthusiasm or is when we think about the opportunities, how
Yeah.
will it impact our business? In one case, it's a bank, and our clients are definitely markets. It's microfinance in Latin America. So we have learned the vocabulary as well, which is, we could have another complete conversation on, having to learn the vocabulary, the language, where the data may come from, who's setting the standards, and so on. But in our case, in the bank, as I mentioned before, we're dealing with, perhaps we were concentrating on mitigation, and now we're shifting everything to adaptation, right? So just having the right vocabulary at the corporate level engages more enthusiasm, as you say, when it's operational, right? When it's part of our go-to-market.
Yeah, it's a trade-off though, because at some level it's easiest, you can make the quickest attention grab by talking about something that's missing from the risk register, right? Because the board, processes in place at the board level that things get elevated to a risk committee, and there's usually some sort of risk governance framework. So if you say, no, actually one of the things in the top right of our risk matrix, it's missing, or we're not dealing with it well. It's an ESG, it's the climate, it's human rights. That can capture a lot of attention, which can be really useful. But if all you're doing is saying, well, are we compliant? Are we ticking the boxes? Are we avoiding a lawsuit? Yeah, you're missing part of the struggle. Okay, how could this thing that's there, actually, how could we pivot? How could we adapt? How could we change in a way that would turn that into an opportunity? And so I think it's a real trade-off, because when we're missing ESG factors, we're missing both sides. It's probably easiest to get attention for the risks, but the most important strategic options, the real value comes from the business development side, from the new markets, from the new products, the new services, the new customers. And so being attentive to those is much more important. But first you have to get the risk management right.
Yes, of course. And that was the first driver. And
Right.
and yes,
But you don't want to stop, as you said.
You don't want to stop at
Justin,
that
you don't want to
point.
stop there. You'll be like, oh, phew, okay, we're done. We've got it in our ERM system. We're good.
Yes. So I see that we have our first comment. What I will do is I'll remove our spotlights, if you don't mind, and I will ask individuals that have questions to actually open up their mics and introduce themselves and tell us where they're calling from. I don't know, Sad, you're calling from the UK. Are you able to open up your mic and ask the question you put in the chat or make the comment?
All right, well, so I think for those who can see Sat's question, it's about how regulatory requirements are causing firms to seek out opportunities to claim compliance. Yeah, I think it's not just regulatory requirements. There's both, the general counsel is often, really focused on this. Your audit teams, people are trying to say, are you doing what is legally required? Are our filings in shape? Have we filled out the survey? And honestly, at some level, it's distracting. The new EU requirements for a reasonable set of firms, including those in the US, will have 1,440 plus new filing requirements. 1,440. The amount of time it's going to take. Now, I mean, I'm all in favor of transparency, and I think we need more ESG data, but I really question how many firms really should be subject to 1,440 new filing requirements, and whether that's actually a distraction from addressing the 3 or 4 that might really affect value. So I do think, part of what we're in this shakeout right now, where everyone recognizes, or most people recognize, that ESG can be material, but the way we're going about it is wrong. Just full stop, it's wrong. And so we need to, at the same time, fix it and explain what we should be doing. And that's hard. So I agree that there's a lot of distraction and a lot of push towards new reporting, new requirements, new compliance. And with the fixed resources we have, that's actually a problem to making progress. I see two other hands up. Is it Menska?
Hi there, this is Maneksha Genser.
Maneksha.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on this webinar today. I had two quick questions for you. Well, one's quick and the other one's not so quick. You mentioned that there are various programs. So is there an executive education program for ESG on boards for alumni? That's my first one. And then my second one, sorry, go ahead.
Well, so there are two different, depending how much detail you want to get. So if I'm just going into getting there are, sorry, I'm just going onto our page, trying to find the link here. So there's an ESG program that is, well, I'll just put the broader. So there's an ESG program which includes a certificate for senior leaders. And that's an ESG dedicated program that we run. There's also a lower touch Coursera course, which provides, that's a self-study directed, kind of more webinar style. And then there are the programs in corporate governance and for board leaders in which there's a module on ESG. And sort of there's a module that I teach and a module that May McDonald teaches. And so let me see if I can get those programs. So there are, I think May's been in this forum before. She's come in, Mary Hunter McDonald. And so she has some great programs that are focused on corporate governance and boards more broadly, which include within them a briefer content on ESG.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And we can share the links as well with the group afterwards. So don't worry about them. I'll look for them.
Yeah, I'm getting the names up while we're talking, but yeah, go ahead.
And the second one, and maybe this is what the whole course is about, but you mentioned, and this is what I've heard from others as well, which is depending on which industry you're in, obviously ESG is so broad that you can't possibly tackle everything. And so you're going to have to prioritize what's going to be the highest risk, what's going to be the highest value. So I'm just curious about how does one go about doing that?
That's a great question, Marie. Maneshka. I think the first step, which has been emphasized for a while now, is focused on what is variously perceived as material. And you can get that information from what used to be the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and then the International Sustainability Standards Board. They have this thing called a materiality finder or a materiality map that goes industry by industry or sector by sector and suggests what the most salient or most material ESG factors are. So I think that's a great starting point to look at, and it's free, it's publicly available. You can go in, you can type your firm. I'll drop the link in the chat. There you go. Called the Materiality Finder. The problem is it treats materiality as a switch. It either is material or it isn't material. So, it helps you exclude, somewhere between 40 and 70% of the ESG issues and claims they're immaterial. You could quickly challenge whether they're really immaterial. I mean, you could probably come up with a case for something for your firm or your industry that says it's immaterial. Well, no, that's been material. So what we're doing a lot of work on at Wharton is trying to treat materiality not as a switch, but as a scale or as a slide. And saying that, some issues at some points in time are more material than others, but it's never 0-1. It's never yes, no. And so what's the weight we should put on the materiality of an issue? And then how do we ascertain that? One way we'd look at that is look at media content and media discourse. So we look at the media conversation around an industry, around a firm, and we see which ESG issues are coming up very prominently. How much is the conversation around climate versus human rights versus living wage versus ethics and corruption? And how does your firm compare to other firms in your industry? And so try to draw insight from that. And then the next step is thinking about whether those stakeholder concerns, because essentially when you're reading the media, you're saying, what are people concerned about or what are people talking about? Are those likely to hit shareholder value? Is the government likely to intervene? Are customers likely to switch? Are suppliers likely to, not want to do business with you because they might take on some liability? Might workers leave your company? You know, so we try to look at the sensitivity. Once we see there's a lot of discourse, a lot of conversation, we try to say, are there ways that connect that that concern to the P&L? And so that's the thought process that goes behind a lot of our research. Is it material? How much is it material? And then over what time horizon is it likely to hit the P&L? You know, for an industry that has a monopoly where the customers aren't going to switch, the suppliers aren't going to switch, the government's not going to act, unfortunately, even disgruntled stakeholders may not be that material over a 5-year time horizon. But if you've got heavy government regulation, customers have options, suppliers have options, and employees have options, wow, you know, a little bit of unhappiness can quickly eat into your revenues, increase your costs, and lead you to be called up in front of Congress.
Thank you.
Sure. Daria, I see your hand up as well.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today. And sorry, I can't be on video. I'm in a moving vehicle, but I would love to raise a question.
Sure.
As a public company, bank director, and also a director on a few private boards. Obviously this topic is coming up quite a bit, but also in fora like those hosted by NACD and other board serving organizations. So last week in New York for the Directors and Boards Character of the Corporation Conference, the sitting dean of Columbia Business School was talking about ESG and essentially arguing that pulling everything together under that moniker was in fact the problem, because trying to have standard measurement and any sort of standards with so much under one umbrella leads to the confusion that and the politicization that is now happening. So I'm just curious, your reaction to that argument and essentially his projection that within the next few years it'll be pulled back apart.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with that argument. I mean, The Economist made it, I guess was it the summer before or the summer I took over the job? Saying we should just focus on E, let's get E right and stop talking about ESG. I fundamentally disagree. And we had a lot of discussions about this at Wharton. Should we use the label? We knew the controversy was coming. And I'm happy to talk about the controversy more broadly, but let me just answer the specific question. The reason the ESG label came together is because there were a set of environmental, social, and governance factors which were left out. They weren't included in financial models. They weren't included in investment models. They weren't included in business plans. They weren't included in discounted cash flow forecasts. They were left out. What did they have in common? They were left out. So, you could say, well, we should pull it apart because what they share in common is that they were left out. Well, I mean, yes, at some level, we're going to have different methodologies for E and S and G, but they all had this in common, that they were left out. They weren't considered. Their value, the way they affected the P&L was omitted. And so at one level, I appreciate the need to be more nuanced, that our current data, which says you can pull them all together and come up with something like a bond rating, is just misguided. It's wrong. I mean, it doesn't work. So, if you're looking for a AAA ESG rating, you're asking the wrong question. But if we want to improve our ESG strategy, our ESG investments, if we want to account for climate, if we want to bring them back in, to me, it's nonsensical to say, well, let's only focus on some of the things we left out. I mean, let's focus on all the things we left out, the ESG factors that we left out. It doesn't make sense to me to only, let's focus on the most important ones, sure. But I don't agree with the idea that somehow pulling it apart makes it easier. There was so much tension and so much discourse because we created a bundle of things that were clearly left out and that had some commonalities. And that's why you started getting ESG funds and ESG political conversations. I mean, if it wasn't big enough for the opposition to mobilize against, I mean, part of the reason there's a political backlash is because it was powerful. If you just do one little thing here and one little thing there, probably doesn't have the same power, it doesn't have the same impact. Bundling it all together had impact and led to a counter mobilization. I think giving up on the bundling would be kind of conceding to the opponents. And I think that would be, a step backwards, not a step forward. So I fundamentally disagree with those arguments. And I think they misunderstand the nature of the opposition and the path forward. I do agree with many of the criticisms of ESG that the data and the analysis are not fit for purpose. But my answer is let's improve them. And that's the approach we're taking. And any
Excellent. Thank
talk
you.
about labeling, sorry, just any talk about just if we called it something else, the opponents, and if it was successful, the opponents would just come after that, and then we'd have to have a conversation about, well, should we stick with the label X? So to me, we're not going to solve the political problem with the label.
Sure, and really appreciate that. And just to be clear, I was not that was not my personal view. I was just sharing what view was espoused at the event. So thank you so much for your response.
And these are they're well-meaning people on all sides of this trying to the Columbia Dean is a very thoughtful leader and doing a lot, especially on the climate side. So well-intentioned people can still disagree, but I do disagree on that one. Reza.
Good evening. Hi, I'm joining you from Paris. I'm Wharton 87, Wharton Grad and Law Institute 93. My question is not specifically about ESG, but it's more about governance issues. And specifically, I wanted to know what you thought about what happened at OpenAI and the whole, the ousting of the CEO, him coming back, that whole thing. Just from your point of view, what were some of the lessons learned? What happened?
Well, I think we're still trying to figure out exactly what happened. As there was an attempt to create a very unusual governance structure that would balance the ethical implications of AI for humanity with the profit motivations, and to try to create some guardrails for a board to not focus as much on the profits, but focused on these broader ethical concerns. And for reasons that are not fully public, there was a divergence of opinion about some element of the strategy that led that board to oust the CEO, and then the next CEO and then the entire employee base. Something like 70% of the employees threatened to resign and either move to Microsoft with the CEO or not, and so the company would be destroyed. And so the board gave up, and then some of the board members resigned. So what's the lesson here? I think when we task a board, I think one of the challenges when we explicitly tasked one board with oversight on non-financial issues, and then we had another group of stakeholders who were really motivated by the finances, and that's a very delicate balance. That's better managed by regulation. It's better managed by industry collaboration than a nonprofit board that is going to act sometimes in conflict with the rest of the organization. So I think one lesson is trying to create board structures which do something other than maximize long-term sustainable value is going to create inherent conflict, especially at the moments where we need the most or are most concerned. And so I don't think creative board design is really the solution for ESG. I mean, people point to Patagonia or something, but it's a very unique situation and circumstance. So I think that's one lesson. And I think the other lesson is that in an area with such massive societal implications as AI, which is certainly part, and I think should be part of the ESG conversation, ethical AI, one of the darling ESG stocks is NVIDIA, because they have very low carbon emissions from their chips, but they don't have a very strong ethical AI policy. And I think we should be, I think we should be looking at NVIDIA's ethical AI policy and assessing whether they should be in ESG portfolios. So I think whenever it comes to a sort of a tension or a new issue, we should be addressing it in a way that makes clear what the long-term profit, sustainable profit issues are. And where there's a societal implication, we're better off trying to craft a government regulatory or other solution. We can only do so much through private governance and private ordering.
Thank you.
Is it okay for me to ask a question?
Sure. Yeah. Oh, sorry, William. I didn't see your hand.
Hi, Professor.
Surprised.
So, someone mentioned calling the consultants.
Yeah.
If I join a board and I happen to be the one with the most ESG knowledge, as we're all trying to learn, is there a playbook or a recommendation, short of hiring consultants, what could board members do to start the process to evaluate ESG for the company? Meaning, what are we doing for compliance? What are the results of our involvement in ESG in the performance of a company, et cetera? Is there any recommended approach to start?
Well, I mean, I think there's the best for any single board, the best roadmap is probably previous successes that had something, similar like this. So, an effort to improve enterprise risk management, and an effort to improve, technological change, or doing some scenario exercise, envisioning the future, looking at digitalization. I gave those examples. Look for something that had cross-functional strategic implications where the board played a constructive role in redesigning, reshaping, reformulating processes within the organization, and then try to mirror and build on those successes and learn from whatever failures there were. I think at the simplest level, there are a couple things that the engine number one ExxonMobil experience highlights. It is very dangerous to have a board that does not have competence in critical areas for a business. I mean, that's an obvious point, but the ExxonMobil board at the time engine number one mounted its campaign had 0 years of fossil fuel experience sitting on the board. 0. All right, it's really striking. Largest upstream oil and gas company in the world had no one with any fossil fuel experience. They also had no one with any energy transition or climate transition experience or climate science background. So first, do you have people on the board? Well, if you're that person, great. Okay, you at least have the N of 1. Is there someone else on the board, who has the relevant experience, who has some of that? And then start asking the questions. What are the material ESG risks? Are you satisfied with the way that they're presented relative to other material risks that you might see on the risk committee? What about consideration of opportunities? When is the firm ready to report according to the task force for climate financial disclosures? Are you ready to do that kind of scenario analysis? Show us that scenario analysis. So I think those are some of the first questions. Show us the risks, show us the opportunities, show us the reporting around different climate scenarios, and then maybe pick something that's not climate, that is material to your business. Again, it could be human rights, it could be living wage, it could be worker retention, it could be AI, it could be ethics and corruption. Walk us through and show me that these systems kind of operate in different areas of the ESG, space that are material. Don't focus on the immaterial, because then you're really just creating a compliance or distraction, but focus on material risks and ask to be informed and convinced that the company's strategy is up to par. And that's not just about data and checklists and a tear sheet or a mission statement. It's the same rigor and the same level of analysis that you'd ask, are we seriously thinking about AI? Are we seriously thinking about, privacy and data? Are we thinking about China the right way? I mean, the same way these big strategic issues impact the business, depending on the industry and the geography, ask for that same level of rigor around ESG. And if the answer is yes, great, you should be satisfied. If the answer is no, okay, then you need to start creating some sort of system, some sort of structural change initiative to meet that. And that may require hiring consultants, or it may not.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Sure. Alan?
Hey, Professor, thank you. A great discussion today. Alan Levinson, Wharton grad, 89, calling in today from Grosse Pointe, Michigan. I'm curious, 5 years from now, when we're having this conversation, what do you see this looking like? And will there be a 4th letter? Will we be down to 2 letters? Kind of curious to get your take on that.
I hope we'll have gotten a little bit further through the shakeout, in that we'll have backed away from some of the overclaiming, some of the overpromising, the hype, that somehow ESG was going to fix the planet and make everyone billionaires, and it was going to be easy, and you just buy the data set from someone, and none of that made sense in hindsight. It got the buzz going, but you know, so we'll recognize that it's part of good investing and part of being a good company. Now, does that mean it'll go away? People are like, well, if it's just being a good, well-governed company, then why do we need ESG? You know, I might ask the same. Actually, my personal experience, as I mentioned, is in the area of international business. And, you know, I often, do we need to have a global division? Why does Wharton have a multinational management group? You know, does it really, like, shouldn't it just be part of everything, part of marketing, part of strategy, shouldn't everything be global? I mean, in theory, it should be, but it doesn't happen over 5, 10. And I can tell you, that conversation's been going on at Wharton for, 35, 40 plus years. That conversation's been going on at Wharton. And the issue is that the political expertise in the global context, you know, introduces the discipline of political science, comparative politics, comparative sociology that isn't part of most of the other functional parts of an organization. And so there's room for some specialist knowledge and then new room to have it be grafted on or connected to the rest of the enterprise somehow. But that's always a struggle. And I think ESG is going to be the same. We're going to, you know, if we make, hopefully we make progress on carbon, but then we're going to be dealing with biodiversity loss and methane and you know, maybe we'll be dealing with carbon by putting hydrogen sulfates in the atmosphere, which will then have acid rain again, which will have impacts. So, you know, we're going to continue to have climate-related issues which impact the business. We're going to continue to have worker and community issues which impact the business. And so I think we'll have new ESG issues. You know, will it be sustainable cotton? Will it be, carbon recycling batteries? You know, we're not going to figure any of this out in 5 years. Life cycle approaches. I mean, one of the biggest issues is just how much waste we generate as a society, and that, like the social cost of carbon, producers aren't taxed or responsible for the waste. And so I think over time, we'll make progress on some of the most polluting items that go into landfills. But that's not going to happen over 5 years. So I think the issues will evolve, the sophistication will evolve, and we'll hopefully do a better job of not imposing as many negative externalities on society and having that be more part of the production process, that we recognize those earlier. But there'll always be room for specialists and committees and cross-functional groups who are looking over the horizon to the next technology, the next issue, the next risk, the next data set. At some level, we're just trying to get ESG to be as good as the rest of the financial service and board governance areas, right? We're being on a board is always hard. It never becomes easy. If it was, you wouldn't need the board. Managing ESG issues is always going to be hard. It's always going to require some subjective judgment combined with hard data, combined with an assessment of people. And it's just, the frontier is going to keep moving in the same way that the frontier of good governance or the frontier of good investment strategy is going to continue moving.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sure. Like I said, short answer would be we're in the early innings of a long game. And one that, you know, probably doesn't end at 9 innings or something. It just keeps going.
Thank you everybody for asking. I wanted to, there were some questions in the chat, in the registration form.
Sure.
And one of them was committees, right? So a lot of, we've
Yep.
touched a little bit about the audit committee, the sustainability committee, if there is such. So one of the questions was exactly that. Do you see that ESG should be, you know, is there a playbook for where the ESG responsibility of the board should sit? We've talked a little bit about it, but tell us your point of view.
Yeah, I don't think a specialized committee is going to typically be the right answer. I mean, I don't want to say never because I've seen many things work, but I do worry that if you create an ESG committee, is it going to be populated with the best people on the board? Is it going to have strategic voice? I think you're much better off asking, okay, if ESG is material, well, then it should be we should have ESG conversations around risk. We should have ESG conversations around strategy. We should have ESG conversations around compensation. We should have ESG conversations around hiring, and retention. We should be having ESG conversations everywhere. If we just pigeonhole it and say, we're going to have these ESG conversations over here, it's much more likely it's going to be a tick box or compliance function to meet the reporting requirements, which, as I've highlighted, are asking the wrong questions and not subject to audit or not subject to, so I think we need, I wouldn't advocate for siloing. I would advocate for each area of the board, each committee to ask, what ESG factors are relevant for our meetings, and are we confident, comfortable with the level of sophistication with which they're being addressed?
Yes, and I agree. And I think one of the challenges right now, at least in some of the audit committees where I sit, is the audit part of it, the audit element of whatever goals we set or whatever it is that we're tracking. I think that has to have the same rigor that our financial statements, right? And so I think that's where it definitely needs to have something of the audit element of, that committee, the spirit at least of the audit committee in being so rigorous in understanding where the numbers and the data is coming from.
I mean, again, I think it needs to link to audit, Maria, but I worry about trying to go too far. I mean, at some level you could say we want to have good numbers for everything. But, does your company have the right global strategy? Does it have the right technology strategy? At some level you want those numbers to be right? And so as much as you can, get the numbers on your strategy and on your margins and on your EBIT, get all those numbers right and understand. But at some level, strategy, technology, there's also this, okay, we're managing this big, messy uncertainty, and then we're trying to make the best calculated decisions, which we think will drive value over 3 to 5 years or 3 to 10 years. And that's a combination of hard data and judgment. And so I don't think the answer to ESG is just getting all the ESG data right and getting all the dashboards right. This is more like strategy, more like risk, about connecting imperfect data and looking over the horizon, looking 18 months, 3 years, 5 years out and seeing, are we on the right path? So yes, we want the data to be better than it is, because the data right now is just not good and often driving us over into the wrong direction. But we're never going to solve the problem with just audit. I mean, we've got to be asking it, think about the main committees in a board. We've got to be asking, are we compensating our executives on the right ESG issues? That doesn't just mean carbon, what are the right issues? What would the interim compensation targets be? We've got to be looking at risk and saying, do we have the right ESG on the risk register, and are we mitigating them appropriately? We've got to look at strategy and business development. Are we moving into the right spaces? We've got to look at sort of the composition of the assets and mergers, acquisitions, all of the things a board does. We have to be asking ESG questions within them. And yes, we have to be improving the quality of the data. But if that's the only place the conversation is happening, we're really missing the boat at a board level.
Yes, no, you make an excellent point on that. And I think also with when we were talking about, elevating our view, at least from the board, to opportunities, right? Then you are always tapping strategic analysis or strategic deliberation for the board. And one of the things that we touched upon when we were preparing for this conversation is this group, we include sitting board directors, aspiring board directors, but the theme is corporate governance. How do you envision that this group can help, right? How can we get more involved? You mentioned the word judgment, right? And I think that the more we're engaged, the more we're comfortable with the vocabulary and the vision. I think you brought such excellent points about not just your point just now, but not just reducing ESG to audit and risk. Well, are you seeing any initiatives that we could be involved in, or what would you call to action? What would be your call to action for the group?
No, thanks for the opportunity to highlight that. So, one of the things, the ESG initiative was formed because this is the top 2 priority for Dean James and for the school. And we definitely see the Wharton alumni as a rich source of resources and knowledge and skills. We want to tie the Wharton alum to the Wharton students. We want to tie you into the research programs we're engaged in. So I encourage everyone to go to esg.wharton.penn, wharton.upenn.edu. There's a get involved button, and you can talk, and there are places in which you can mentor, advise, work with our students on projects. So we'd love to have you involved. Some of you, I know, are already coming in and speaking into May's board executive education class. There are a lot of opportunities for that involvement. We'd also love you to spread the word about what we're doing. I mean, I think Wharton is the first business school with an ESG major and an undergraduate concentration. We're the first business school that has this flagship live ESG live program for executives. We'd love to, we think by elevating these 4 centers and these 4 programs up to the level of the ESG initiative and putting senior leadership and resources behind it, we're really leading the way in the business school community. But we'd love to, have you and your networks also highlighting that and advocating that and connecting us to other thought leaders. So if you're familiar with boards or leaders or companies or portfolio managers that you think are doing the things I'm talking about, we feel that we're pushing forward the frontier, but we're doing that in partnership. And so we'd love to be connected with them. And so I think it's both your own personal involvement and then your advocacy and your connectivity between us and other leaders so we can stay at that forefront. And we'd really welcome your engagement on both of those.
Yes, and you mentioned that you're doing current research on the indigenous community. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So one of, within the Political Risk and Identity Lab, we've received some major grants from the Bay and Paul Family Foundation and the Christensen Fund to look at the importance of indigenous representation and more broadly, diverse representation on boards, but the real focus on indigenous representation. And just, the basic insight here is, things like the Dakota Access Pipeline Project disaster wouldn't probably have occurred for Citibank and others if they'd had indigenous representation on the boards who understood the importance of that land and those water rights to the indigenous communities and how little room there was or scope there was for compromise. And we've done some qualitative research and put up a white paper highlighting the experience of some indigenous board representatives in addressing some of these issues. And it's really striking and somewhat disturbing how few indigenous board members there are on publicly traded companies in the US. But we found over a dozen of them, maybe 18, and have done interviews. And we're continuing to do work, not just in the US, but also across Latin America. I was actually just I came back from Peru on the red eye last night, met with a company, Grupo Aje, which is a fantastic carbonated beverages and juice manufacturer with really strong giving back to indigenous communities that are farming some of the fruits and berries in the Amazon and really getting them to help be part of the conservation effort as opposed to the deforestation effort in the Amazon. So we're looking for those cases of companies that are addressing ESG issues well, sometimes because they have indigenous or diverse opinions on the board that help them see over the horizon or see a way forward that others don't. So if you feel like some of the boards you've been on have been successful in avoiding some of these risks or seizing some of these opportunities, please do get us in touch. And there are opportunities for us to do interviews, to profile the companies, to write case studies, or just to learn confidentially from those experiences.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Both, for example, William and I are also members of the Latino Corporate Directors Association. So, this is one forum where we come together, but I think many of us are wearing different hats with different organizations, right? So that's really interesting to know that, Wharton may be interested, right? If we find out about, success stories or, challenges that are being addressed in a specific, in a creative way. So that is great to know.
I think the one other last word, I think, there's a lot of talk now and a lot of excitement around increased funding for the green transition, especially you mentioned, Latin America, but also in Africa and funneling new project finance money to address the transition. One of the things we're really concerned about is that may not take into account some of the conflict-related risks, risks and conflict-sensitive areas, not just around indigenous communities, but areas with large inequalities in other areas. And so as we start pushing more money for the green transition, which is absolutely necessary, we can't lose sight of human rights and other risks. And so if you or your company, or if you're aware of places where the just transition is connecting with human rights issues, that's something else we're very interested in.
Yeah, that is great. And just on a light note, I do work in Peru for one of my boards. So it's great that you highlight Grupo Aje. It's an amazing family, an amazing company, and yes, the work they're doing in the Amazon is just commendable.
I'm glad to hear that. I just met, I had a chance to be on a panel with one of the executives, and I was very impressed. And I did a little bit of background research and promised that I would do more. And maybe we'll have a teaching case on Gripa High soon.
Yeah, and they're at COP right now. I
Yes.
think they're part of so
Yeah, the
proud-
executive I was with was getting on the plane was getting on the plane after the panel.
Yes. So with that, we have 4 minutes. I just want to use the 4 minutes to, first, thank you so much. Let me remove the spotlight on myself so that we can see you quite, bright and clear. Thank you so much, especially, now that you've shared that you just flew back from Latin America. Thank you for taking the time to spend a little bit of time with Wharton alum. I think this is part of the magic, right? We have
Absolutely.
a common background and we help each other out on any conversations around boards, around corporate governance. And as you mentioned, boards have to be on top of their game, regardless of their executive experience. So definitely because of our executive experience, we have a voice at the table, but we have to continue to, be on top of what are the issues, what are the material topics that we have to learn about and be more open about. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us. I hope it was fun for you as well.
It was. Thanks, Maria. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for all of your interest and continued engagement with the Wharton School.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll stop recording now, and I'll usually stay for a few minutes to speak to people if they have questions about our group. Thank you.